Don't get 10 or 15 or 50 mentors. If you get too many mentors, they will all have an opinion. So the only thing you actually achieve here is that you get more confused. You have an idea and then you have 15 different opinions. How's that helpful?
Today, we're going to be diving deep into the state of gaming in 2025. Today's guest is Hendrik. He's the president of the European Games Developer Federation and CEO of Remote Control Productions, which currently consists of 16 different studios around Europe, Asia, and North America.
I'm very glad that the games industry overall seems to keep it real. If you want to start now in the games industry as a junior or form your new studio, it's going to be a tough ride. So I think one of the key things is to build that trust, to have some vision, some exaggeration of that. You have to ideally stay positive, the captain of the ship, right? If you're there doom and gloom and you always think about, we could die in a minute, and then you tell everybody we could die in a minute, you're not going to run a successful business, right? Now the relationship level is level 2. Well, how do we reach level 5? And maybe we reach level 10. But, dude, you want to behave like level 10. We're not there yet because we just met yesterday. Why not have that conversation? Everybody will get it. Take more risks. If it's you and your 2 friends in the company, what is really there to lose?
Could you explain the old games problem for the developer here?
A lot of players out there.
Welcome everyone to the Gaming Playbook. Today we're going to be diving deep into the state of gaming in 2025. Today's guest is Hendrik. He's been the forefront of European gaming for decades now. He's the president of the European Games Developer Federation and CEO of Remote Control Productions, which currently consists of 16 different studios around Europe, Asia, and North America. And he's helped shape how games are made, funded, sustained, and doesn't shy away from the truth. Hendrik, welcome to the show.
Hey, hi, Harry. Nice to be here. Excited to have that conversation.
Me too. Alrighty. So for everyone at home, in this episode, we're going to explore the biggest challenges facing the gaming industry today, leadership strategies to stay resilient and adaptable, and what Hendrik has learned from decades in the industry. If you're a game developer, leader, or someone passionate about the games industry, this episode will be good for you. Alrighty. So you recently did a kind of State of the Union style talk, and I wanted to open up with a bit of a kind of serious question. So 2024, I feel like was a bit of a bloodbath for gaming in a sense. The numbers were going down. And you mentioned recently like sales per game were down and the sentiment was also down. So I wanted to ask you, like, what's the harsh reality no one's admitting right now when it comes to the games industry?
I'm not so sure that there is no one admitting towards it. I'm very glad that the games industry overall seems to keep it real again and again. Not all the time. And of course, we also have hype trains. We jump on board and then everything's super YOLO. But overall, I think people are seeing the challenges. And maybe the one thing which I regularly encounter and want to share again, if you want to start now in the games industry as a junior or form your new studio, it's going to be a tough ride. That's probably the main thing, right? For let's say the last 15, nearly 20 years, everything was growing. People were quite excited. Educational facilities, politicians, everybody was like, yay, let's go into this. Let's even educate more people how to make games. And at the moment, I have to say, that's not necessarily what we need, as in more development studios and more individual people. And again, I totally value their passion, and I'm not saying that I'm for this, but at the moment it's going to be even more difficult than under normal circumstances. That's probably one of the elephants in the room.
Okay, so for people at home, we're obviously going to cover what entry talent can do regardless of the situation. But I wanted to start with more about the studio leader perspective. So if there's a struggling studio leader now, business-wise, like what is their biggest risk when it comes to 2025?
Cash. This is cash, managing cash flow, and very importantly, being aware of it. One of the reasons my company exists is that we help studios create financial visibility and so forth, awareness, and then be able to talk about these kind of junction points early enough. I've seen too many, companies, not only in gaming, but let's say in domains where we are driven by passion. Some of us don't even care about profits. Some of us are even anti-capitalist, blah, 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 right? But we are still living, most of us, in a capitalistic society. So we have to acknowledge that fact. So that kind of financial awareness and then making the decision, how I always call it, protect the ship first, And that includes, right, it needs to stay afloat, right? If it's gone, it's gone. So basically, for the struggling entrepreneur in that field, yes, dive into the numbers, even if it's painful, even if it's to a degree boring. At the moment, I don't think it's boring. It's probably rather frightening. And go in, get mentors, get people you trust, call us, call other entrepreneurs in gaming, and ask them about best practice methods, right? And I know it sounds tough, but that includes probably firing. I always say firing and not laid off. Laid off sounds so nice and something I'm not involved in. So this is why I particularly say firing, to be staying to the truth, right? That you rather fire some of them sooner, reduce cost. If you have other big cost factors, be my guest, reduce those. But ultimately, buy yourself time, even to the degree that you cut so low that you are at least break even again. We need time now, right? Sure, some of you, maybe early, maybe you have still cash in the bank. It's also crisis, Greek work, right? It also is not just a bad thing, but it is an opportunity too. And I'm not talking about those guys trying to exploit crises and sell stuff of overpriced. That's not what I'm talking about. Don't take advantage of it, right, to exploit other people. But I'm saying this is also a moment to reflect, to look, and maybe even take more risks, especially if you look at what you could potentially lose. If it's you and your two friends in the company, what is really there to lose, right? Depending a bit in which country we live, what's the social security setup, and so on. But assess what is there to lose, what is there to gain. And obviously, the bigger you are, the more responsibility you have. And I feel you do as an entrepreneur for also your people, to not just be like, hey, by the way, you fired in a week, cheerio, right? That to me is an asshole, sorry to say. But kind of manage that responsibility, which, by the way, also includes talking to your people, right? You should never be in a moment where you fire your people and they are kind of completely surprised because they thought everything's so great. We also pride ourselves to treat our people as adults. That's how we call it, meaning that we involve them in updates, not all the details, but in the overall financial outlook. I don't want people to be surprised. Sure, sometimes they get afraid a bit of this, but I rather want them to act on their own. And I don't know about you, family setup, but some people have children. I get it. They maybe need to play it safe. So rather leave on their own accord, find something else, and so on. But they should be able to make that decision, go through the thought process and themselves too.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, but it reminds me of someone who told me, like, we're building studios, not games. So if you're going to build a studio, that needs to be self-sustaining. But if you're only gambling everything on the game, then that puts lives at risk, like especially when you got kids involved there. So is that real nature?
Yeah. I totally agree, right? I always tell everybody RCP helps building studios and games at the same time, right? There's other people out there who do one or the other, or focus on. We kind of try to do both at the same time because in game development, which we're primarily active in, I think that's what you need to do. And you also need to acknowledge and tackle it in a professional manner, right? So sure, in game development, people take pride of getting better, finding shortcuts, use better tools, blah, blah, blah. The same should be true for entrepreneurship, right? There is no reason why out of a bunch of friends, I exaggerate, go into stereotypes here, right? A bunch of friends from a studio, the one who can deal a little bit with finance and the numbers, oh, you're the CEO, you take care of the business, right? Meaning, they're not necessarily trained for it. I'm not saying that everybody needs to be trained for it, right? Economics and all this in most countries, I wouldn't call it very intellectual and sophisticated, to be very blunt, right? Again, don't want to diminish anybody who did that. And there's great careers coming out of it. But in general, it is not rocket science, right? But someone needs to then try to focus on it. Because it's not just understanding business, it's about leadership, it's about legal, how to deal with people, how to kind of stay in the moment, also in regards to zeitgeist. Right? A couple of years ago, it was very much the industry also driven by its workers. Right? There was such a high demand in people that, of course, incentives, how we dealt with people changed a bit. Now this changes again. not because, I don't want to treat my people the best, but, tougher times, I have less money available. So stuff changes. And for you as a leader, as an entrepreneur, it's important that you kind of stay on top of things for your own skills, soft skills and hard skills ultimately, right?
Right. So some people at home might have not heard of RCP, or maybe have heard of it but not understand the scale. So I think it would be interesting to hear kind of like, how do you summarize RCP? Because it's an interesting business.
Yes. Thanks for noticing. Funny enough, this year we're going to be 20 years old, so it's also not a new business, right? And the intention when we set it up was basically that we work with developers to make them, especially on the long term, successful. That's very abstract, right? And then I have a personal background in political science and philosophy, so I'm neither a clinician or a business guy by university kind of teachings. But through stuff like philosophy, for me, game making is also a personal expression, right? It has an artistic messaging, cultural, and so on. So on the one hand side, for me, it was always clear that we cannot just build a corporate structure, and because my finance people like it, that they consolidate studios and on my balance sheet and then do financial engineering and then exaggerate and do stuff which maybe some people in the north of Europe did a bit too much in the last years, if you know what I'm talking about. So for us to basically have that idea, we help development studios to create in a sustainable manner, meant we have to find ways how to do it. How are we doing it? We normally become minority shareholding partners in those studios as a partner, not as a financial investor. So we don't bring big checks, because what we invest is called sweat for equity. We invest our brain and our work. That normally, to give you an example, means, whatever, 5 to 10, 15 people. That's roughly the average when people contact us. You're already doing something in the games industry. Some of them might still be at university, but they started doing the prototype and they want to build this out and so on. And, the maximum was 35 people already making millions in revenue, right? But they come to this point in realization where they understand, if it's just me, it might, as a company, it might be too tough. So let's go to someone like us where we become partner. Normally we do 25+% of the shares, because I want to be a significant partner. Think of us as multiple people, but ultimately similar if you would just co-fund with a couple of friends, right? And we then take over a lot of the corporate side. How do you set up the company? How you do this over time? That's the part which we call basically that no one goes to prison, right? Nobody forgets to pay taxes. We are not violating labor law, and so on. Then what I already mentioned before, helping to create these financial tools and so on, and these habits to look at it, right? And to be honest, that takes years to get used to it, right? And really, at one point in time, even embrace it. Then obviously show us the money is we have a BizDev team, 6 people now, who ring up the publishers, the platforms, gets more and more broad, to basically check, is there any requests for proposals out there where we can pitch on? Is there stuff where our ideas actually make sense to that publisher and we could use an existing IP from them? Or are we using a third-party IP, a publisher, a developer? Let's make it even more complicated, and then some financial party. And by the way, this is something which will get more and more normal, right? We can't just go publisher, developer, or developer just makes Minecraft, gets rich, done, right? This is kind of survivor bias. And we help on that. And then what else we do is we help on production. So this is not that we teach them this one winning formula, the silver bullet, right? How you do production, that's nonsense in my opinion, but assess where they are today and then help them through iterative process to get better and better and better. And last but not least, we have a business analytics intelligence team, which also partly helps what we call shadow publishing ultimately. So we have more and more of our teams who try to either fully self-publish or do kind of co-publishing and so on, take over more responsibility in that regard. And we've been building and doing stuff like that already for years. So ultimately, no, we are not a publisher. We are not a financier. We are what We already decided 20 years ago, a production company. And that was inspired by the movies, right? We bring the partners together, we help them, we guide them, and we do it long term. What you would say in kind of the overall business community is that we are a shareholding company, consulting company, or how some VCs would call themselves now, a management company.
Really, really cool. So
Yeah.
you got this economies of scales and this, like, I guess, bird's eye view, which is what I want to dig into, because you mentioned a few categories there, and I'm sure we can tease some lessons. It's funny. I want to do this, but on the service side. So with my business, it's ghostwriting for CEOs of service side businesses. And I notice a lot of them are good at one or two things. They might be great at conferences, but they don't post on LinkedIn. They might be great at cold email, but they just can't sell, or the offer needs some help. And I feel like that's where I want to go in the future. So this is an interesting conversation for me. And I really want to dig in because you've got all these lessons. I'm sure you bring them to other studios. So I want to section this into two parts, actually. So I want to dig a little deeper into just why we are at this stage, just for a bit of context for people, because you've mentioned some things in a previous talk I want to go deeper on. And then I would love to go deeper on those parts, if you will allow it.
Sure.
Alrighty. So you mentioned the old games problem. Could you explain the old games problem for the developer here, like if you're speaking to them?
Yes. So what we normally refer to, and there's different ways to call it, is that a lot of players out there are still playing games which came out 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago. Skyrim, right? People still play Skyrim. I finished it, I don't know, when I was young, if you know what I mean. And not only do players stick with those games, sometimes for a very long time, but even players who are, let's say, the next wave, young, go buy Skyrim. I get it, right? They also want to dive into and experience masterpieces. As a hardcore gamer myself, I played thousands of games in my life, and I still play more than 100 games per year, right?
Wow.
So I get it, right? I get it that you also want to go in there, but it's a problem for all the new kids on the block, and of course, if you do new games. Because I think at the moment it's between 6 and 7% on the revenue on Steam is put into new games. That's crazy.
You say 6 to 7 or 60?
6 to 7%.
Oh, that's bad. That's not a lot.
On the kind of new games, and I think sorry, you have to exclude. That's not true. Sorry, I have to correct myself. Obviously, a Black Wukong was big, but so there's a few of those. Then there's the old, and then there's kind of, if you are an indie developer and you do your thing, that's the share you are fighting kind of against, right? Because unfortunately, for the longest time when the market was growing, every developer was like, the other developer is not my competition, they're my friends, right? They're crazy as I am to make games. Now with this kind of stagnant market, we are getting more and more competition, which is not something I like emotionally, but it's unfortunately also one of those truths, right?
So with this old games problem, what mistakes are people making? And they're not taking into account the fact that this problems exist. Like, what can we practically do about the fact that this is the state?
One of the most obvious mistakes people do is, and I see this nearly every day, is that they do pitches for new games and they benchmark it with those behemoths. And then they kind of say, this budget for this game makes sense and so on, where I'm like, dude, you take the most successful games in the genre and that's your benchmark. If I'm a responsible financier, I will never give you money. You can't take the outliers, right? We can't all become the big boys, the big girls in the market. That's impossible. So that's the first thing I think people need to understand. So either if you only have that data because other data is not available to you, then discount it, deduct 50%, whatever, right? But ideally, you go through the process of doing the market research, and there's tons of tools out there, most of them free, or maximum you have to subscribe. A couple of them you pay $10 per month, whatever. Everybody should be able to afford this, right? And then you don't go only to the outliers, but you go to the average in the market. I think that's one thing. The other one is be very careful with these kind of hype things, right? This is a couple of years ago. Oh yeah, even on PC, on Steam, we have to do free-to-play games and all this. But how many big free-to-play games will a player play? Are you playing 5, free-to-play multiplayer shooters? Probably not, right?
Probably one.
You might, yeah, you will check them out, all of them, right? Because you do FOMO, right? If we think back of MMO RPGs, when we played I started with Ultima Online, but when everybody kind of was playing World of Warcraft, sure, we checked out new MMOs for a month, right? Back in the days, the first month was free. And we come back, right?
There's a saying for RuneScape where you never quit RuneScape, you only take a break. And that has been the case for me. Like, I've probably played that game in over like 10 years now, but like I've probably had a 2-year sprint, 3 years later again. But if I think back, how many MMOs have I played? I think I tried Warframe for 3 days, and then I just get the guilt. It's like, yeah, but I could play the game I've invested hundreds of hours in.
Your friends, right? People might recognize your character, whatever, right? This is to a degree you could say it's kind of sunk cost fallacy, right? You put so much in there already, so you stay. But obviously, with games, it's also a very big emotional factor, as you just said, right? If you grew up with RuneScape, that's the thing, right? I didn't, so why would I check out Rune? I played it. I don't know. I don't even remember for half an hour, and it was like, I'm out, right? Now I have a better idea what it is, but I already had other fascinating, to not call addictive games, where I wanted to dive in. So I think that's another one, right? You also mentioned what's with us at RCP, and something I forgot to mention, but I think is also very important, is that exchange ideas with other people. So what we do, for example, is all of our studios are on the same Slack. Nice. We have tons of Slack channels where we share market data, where we exchange what cool game we played on the weekend, what's going on with Unreal, and it very often it's like, I have this problem, and ideally 10 minutes later someone else, I had this one too, I solved it like this. Nice. Done, right? And sure, you can do the same thing on all kinds of other platforms, but here you even know the people in many cases, right? You know that you kind of all belong to this. Sometimes we even call it a collective. We call it the RCP family, but you could call it somehow a collective if you want to describe it. And then we even meet 2 times a year, not all of us, but normally at least the heads and the leaders, and have like a mini conference, right? 2-3 days, what I call a RCP mini GDC. Top what we ever were able to do was like 55 talks during these days. To each other, right? Sure, everybody knows that we are connected, so it's tons of trust in the room, right? It's not one of those, I failed, but ultimately it's an advertisement to you how cool you are. We all know those stories, right? I'm not so sure if that's really helpful. Exactly. And for us, we take pride in being direct, right? And even if we fucked up a lot, people are actually sharing that, right? And that kind of exchange of infos, feelings, ideas of the future, I think it's very important.
Yeah, for sure. If people can't all join RCP, if I'm talking to those people, how do they get that? I have an idea, but how do they get that part where they can either join a community and get that support? Like, I feel like, to reframe this question, people know they need a mentor, but then sometimes hope it just happens, or maybe settle potentially. Like, what could people do practically to kind of build those relationships?
There's multiple things. First of all, of course, with us, you can just write us an email, right? Pretty easy. Then we dive in, we will look who you are, what your team is. And for us, the team is even more important besides whatever build or demo you have, right? Because we are long-term, right? I look at it with my colleagues. Where do we think this team can be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Not tomorrow, right? Other ways of doing it, you can go to conferences, right? There's a GDC is around the corner in the US. It's not, it's getting more difficult to go there, thanks Trump. But for some people, and it's getting more expensive, so that's not accessible for everybody, right? But there's all kinds of other shows. Either, in whatever country you're in, there's new shows popping up all the time. I really, really recommend going there. For me, going to my first GDC 2001, right, been a while, has been a life and career changing experience, right? I can only recommend it.
How come?
How come? First of all, of course, my first couple of GDCs, I inhaled the content, right? I went to all the sessions and it was awesome, right? I love this, right? Being in the room, listen to people, in some cases, were kind of role models, or I knew their games, right? Again, I play all the games, right? So it's like I could really decide where I wanted to go. And then a lot of the stuff I took from either best practice advice or even stuff which was new to me, was great. But a lot of stuff where I already had assumptions. And then I have these experienced people kind of confirming my assumptions, gave me great confidence and great kind of also approval in some cases to even go beyond, my first GDC, I was still with Tech2 Interactive, even go against my own company and colleagues, not in an aggressive way, but saying, no, I don't believe that. I think that's more true. And in some cases, it was how I felt it. In some cases, of course, it didn't because I'm not a genius. And on the other hand, and it's the mentor side, I met so many people, right? The first GDC I went was still in San Jose. And back in those days, basically, everybody did hang around in the same lobby of the same hotel, right? So I met so many people just hanging around there. And to a degree, that's still possible. One big advice, though, don't get 10 or 15 or 50 mentors. Because the more the merrier is not true here, right? If you get too many mentors, they will all have an opinion. So the only thing you actually achieve here is that you get more confused. Do you have an idea? And then you have 15 different opinions. How's that helpful? So I advise you guys, find a couple of people where you really resonate. Maybe it's 3, maybe it's 5. Also, think about, not only getting people where in every conversation they agree with you with everything. That's not helpful either, right? This is then call your mom, right? She will always ideally be supportive. But you need to have people who have the guts to apply what's called radical candor. Maybe some of you are familiar with the book, great book, which is you challenge directly and you care personally. So if I would do this right now, whatever, I have something where I object how you do the podcast, right? I would say, hey, Harry, I think this could be better, or should be better. But by the way, I still believe that you're a great guy and you can do it. And I offer you your help too. I'm not just saying, Harry, you asshole, do better. That's not helpful. It's still challenging, but it's not helpful. But if you combine both elements, I think you can do well. Look out for those people who also tell you the truth. And another thing, don't just show people randomly at shows your game for 5 minutes, someone you recognize, even a legend, and ask them for your opinion. Do you think it's likely that they're going to be like, I think this is bad and this is bad? And no, they will be like, yeah, it looks awesome. It's great. Follow your dream. Bye. And then you go back to your team and say, oh, even the super legend said my game is great. Dude, the guy was just basically moderating you to not talk to you anymore, right? So be very careful with the concept of mentors. But again, applied correctly, I think it's very powerful. And other ways, there's IGDA. I hope all of you are aware what that is. There's a mentorship program. It's for free. I'm in that database too, as many of my colleagues and friends. There is sometimes even government supported kind of mentorship programs, and so on and so on. Just do or even do your social, right? Go on social and say, hey, I would like to have a mentor in this and that topic, right? Anybody out there? Yeah, I know more than enough cases where that worked out very well.
Yeah, for sure. I've done this a lot myself, and I resonate with what you said. I had at one point, I did the math, 13 different people I paid for coaching, and some of them were communities, which obviously had multiple ideas. And then I had that very recently where I had 3 different people recommend different styles of businesses to build. And until I went to my OG mentor, he said, okay, what do you actually want?
Yeah.
Then I was like, yes. But I was very, very nearly building something completely different, which was going to scale the team and whatnot. And that only came about because I had too many mentors in a sense. So 100% resonate with what you were saying.
Great.
In terms of leadership now, so you mentioned bad business kills studios, not bad games. So when it comes to bad business, Like, what's actually killing the studio there when it comes to the bad business from a leadership perspective?
From a leadership perspective, I think one of the main things, expectation management. So leadership, of course, involves other people. If you tell them the next game is going to be the shizzle, we all going to be rich, and everything's built on top of that, and then reality normally hits and it doesn't work out, you will have a lot of people disappointed. So to balance this, yes, sure, a CEO, one of the key jobs is we have to have an idea of the future, involving also being ideally visionary. Great word, right? But if you are too visionary, no offense, you are living in what I call pipe dream Hausen, right? Hausen is like a German word for little village. And it is just very unrealistic. And at one point in time, no one's going to take you seriously anymore, because whatever you basically thought what would happen in the future and told everybody is not happening. So why would I trust you anymore? So I think one of the key things is to build that trust, to have some vision, some exaggeration of that, right? You have to ideally stay positive, the captain of the ship, right? If you're there doom and gloom and you always think about, we could die in a minute, and then you tell everybody we could die in a minute, you're not going to run a successful business, right? And but again, stay grounded in a certain reality. I think that's one of the key things in leadership. Another thing is you have to build that kind of psychological safety, because if, again, you people are seeing the next rock around the corner you might bump into, but they are afraid of you or disappointed or whatever, and they're not telling you, you're fucked too, right? So you have to build that psychological safety, that it's okay for people in your team to say, did you think about that risk? Or, hey, I don't think you thought about, getting in touch with this person is a bad idea because blah, 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 right? You need a team sharing their thoughts, their feelings, and so on. That doesn't mean, on the other hand, that you run a democratic, again, don't want to diminish anybody, but to paint a picture, kind of a tree hugger club where everything's decided by consensus, right? That can be done in different form of associations and clubs and whatnot. Again, saving the environment is a great thing. So again, don't want to diminish the cause, but in a company, I think it's a very bad idea, right? This is you should invite people to discuss, but as a leader, you should not shy away, even in the beginning of a meeting, to say, guys, even if I ask your opinions now, I just want to make sure that I make the decisions in the end, but I value your opinion. So be also, don't bullshit your people, right? Don't give them the false sense of participation and so on. And this happens again and again, gaming industry. I've seen so many teams where let's do a game jam. And then there's a couple of things about, one of you will build our next game and we're going to do it and so on. So people think, yes, their games will be relevant, they might be produced and so on. And there's so many teams where in the end, they threw everything away from the game jam. So they're basically telling all the people, whatever you guys did is shit. Not necessarily outspoken, but that's the message, right? So if you do stuff like that, always think about your communication and what kind of expectations you trigger. Right? Yeah, there's definitely a couple of things already. Let me know if there's anything else you want me to dive in on that subject matter.
Yeah, for sure. I actually felt this firsthand. So my background's in recruitment, specifically Unity development in Stockholm. And a lot of the studios there had a consensus culture. And I managed to feel this firsthand because I was on the monthly check-in calls with our contractors. And the biggest challenge that came up, it tended to be sometimes that consensus culture just meant things were just super slow. Like if someone had an idea, if someone disagreed, then until everyone agreed in some studios, it just could have been a 2-day fix from the contractor and me perspective, but it ended up being like a 1-3 month fix. So you mentioned that is not ideal, but like, how do we avoid that from happening? Because you mentioned, hey, I'm the leader, I'll be making the decisions, but is there something else that isn't happening that is resulting in this consensus culture?
two things, and before that, of course, Sweden is notoriously famous for that, right? So I think that's an extreme case. And obviously, if you are in Sweden, you can't ignore that culture 100%. Impossible, right? It's so ingrained in their society, so you have to deal with it. But to answer your question, culture, right? And this is on the one hand side, how do you want to communicate in your studio? For example, at RCP itself, we not only have a purpose statement, which everybody knows, and I repeat on a regular basis, but we also have 4 core values, which are very often communicated. It's a non-aggressive attitude, it's fellowship, it's a sustainable action, and what we call professional nerdism, right? And then we have like 150 principles where we describe, small things, how we advise people to do things. And especially those principles are not only coming from me, right? The values are mostly driven by me. I'm the CEO. I think, purpose, values, that's a top leadership thing, right? It's not you should involve people to discuss, but it's definitely something you need to decide. The principles are different, right? More people are actually contributing to this. So you ultimately build some kind of framework, even documented, how you want your culture to be. Obviously, the magic lies into, are you then also living it? If I would violate those principles and values on a recurring basis, that's not going to work. So it is hard daily grind to stay in that lane as much as possible. And yes, I do sometimes violate my own values. If that happens and I realize it, first of all, I want my people to call me out. And second of all, and I have to admit, I normally know it by on my own already, then I give context why I did it. Or in some cases, if it happens after the fact, then I say, okay, that's a special situation. Here's the context, here's the rationale, blah, 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 blah. That people basically can understand why this is happening. So you talk about consensus. Another thing is that we are big fans of establishing our own communication style. I mentioned radical candor, right? You join RCP, radical candor will be on your table the day you start.
That's so good. I hired my brother, and I was advised to read Radical Candor to work with my brother. So we read that book together while driving to the coffee shop to work, and that's helped a lot. Basically, anytime my brother was like, I don't like the way you're saying this, it's like radical candor moment. I'm like, oh, okay. it worked like really well because it gives you permission, weirdly, to be honest, when like, why isn't that not the default? But the book is really good at giving you the context as to why it's important.
And this is in one of our teams at peak, we had 28 different nationalities. So how on planet Earth would I think that all of those share the same culture? We just talked about Sweden, right? That's nonsense, right? And a book like this established terminology. Everybody knows what challenging means, care personally. It's kind of establishing that. So understanding. A lot of triggers and conflicts arouse through kind of misunderstandings, right? People understand words differently, semantics, all that. I think that's so avoidable, right? Or at least it should be the goal for you to avoid it as much as possible. So the terminology. And on the other hand, there's so many examples in there where we did workshops where we had people do this in front of each other and so on. Yes, sure. And for some of them, it was incredibly uncomfortable at first. But when they, psychological safety again, when this builds up and, I'm also at sometimes kind of radical candidate myself in the company in front of everybody, right? So they see, I apply this to myself too. Or that, in the very early days of my career, I'm not proud of it, but a lot of people felt that I was intimidating. I'm an active listener, I'm demanding, la, la, la. It was intimidating, right? And so many years ago, I started, especially with the younglings, right? What we call a Padawan club, where we read books, where I lead this group, where I share tons of things, also personal things. So it was so funny. At one point in time, one of those younglings in a bit of setting is challenging me in front of the company, right? Some of the others are like getting pale and thinking that now Hendrik is going to crucify that person, right? And the opposite happened, right? I actually thanked them and said, this is a great example of the future of the company. And these sometimes are the smaller things, the symbolic things. They might, from a kind of objective, rational perspective, not be important, but they are incredibly important to build your culture.
Yeah, I love that leading by example there, where you just got rid of the assumption by showing, well, this is what would happen.
Or I obviously don't really have much hair. I sometimes make jokes about it myself, right? And then everybody gets, this dude can be serious, but he's not all serious, right?
Yeah, there you go. Sweet. So, in terms of partnership and operations, I really wanted to ask you about this because, well, you've done it for 20 years. And I wonder if there's any game studios who are missing out on this partnership feeling. So we mentioned already about having that community of like peers to talk to, but from a business perspective now, when it comes to operations, how can you stay alive through partnerships? If I'm looking at a developer in this example.
There's all kinds of partnerships on stuff you can do. First of all, of course, you can regionally check out who are other development studios. Get in touch with those guys, right? There's so many cases that one studio does really well, actually has a shortage of people to do stuff. If you know them well, they're gonna call you.
I had that happen at PGC, where there was one studio who, surprisingly, after I'm trying to pitch lead generation services to the founder, he's like, yeah, I do all the business development. I'm like, okay, great. And then he goes, yeah, we just have too much work, but we just refer it to one or two partners. But I got from an idea, like he wasn't out looking for partners. So unless you were on his shortlist, you would never know.
Exactly. So first of all, you get to know them, right, on this kind of peer level. Then you can also build relationships with someone who's different than you. Let's say, you're a developer. You can build a relationship with a publisher where you try to not only do one project, but multiple. You could have a general agreement, all that kind of stuff. You can build a relationship to all those guys, the Razors and all those hardware guys in the world, right? Maybe do something with them, or they have you on the horizon when you do self-publishing, you get more reach, etc., etc. You can go also explicitly in other regions. I mentioned this in my talk about State of the Union on what to do to the future, because there will be more development talent also in low-cost countries. So we can either try to see them as enemies, which I despise. I'm heavily anti-racist, and there's so many oppressed and underprivileged people out there. Now going against them just because it's my own interest, I think would be really a bad thing, right? So what's the obvious answer here? Reach out to them, become partner with them, and don't do it in an exploitative way. But in a win-win way, right? It's totally legit to go to a low-cost country and say, hey, you guys are way lower cost than me. That's awesome. So that statement per se is not bad, right? And then say, okay, I'm going to pay you maybe better than you would get in your region. It's still much lower what I have to pay. So it's a win-win thing, right? And I think this is also partly the way to the future, is to have different people from all around the world with different talent, but also with different kind of cost attached, how the flexibility is and all this. And I'm not saying that anytime soon we are going to be like in the movies, where for every movie you kind of, for shooting, you bring in all those people and then they all leave and maybe you call them again in 2 years, right? I don't think that will ever happen in gaming. But thinking a little bit in those principles, what's behind that, I think totally makes sense.
Okay, I have a follow-up here. So in theory, that would be a remote collaboration if you were to do that. Mm-hmm. So if you were to work with a low-cost country, because I had a question prepared, and the question is, if you're looking to partner with a low-cost country, like partner is the key word there. This wouldn't be necessarily outsourcing, like, hey, do these assets, because that doesn't need, I guess, much nuance. There's probably a little, but when you said partner in terms of maybe for projects or multiple projects, that seems quite difficult, because I've spoken to a lot of founders and I've met them, and they said they've struggled with managing their team going from the pandemic time to now, like having a good remote studio, let alone doing that now with another studio which has completely different culture and their own built-in studio culture. So that sounds very difficult. And I'm guessing you've seen this a few times. So very direct question here is like, how do you make remote work?
First of all, again, truth and what's really the reality of things, right? This is if you are in your company and you get remote workers who are part of your company. In some cases, that's not fully true because they're not having the same social benefits, because they're not employed, because they only work on contract and so on. So first of all, be real. What does it mean for the individual, right? And this is, I know it sounds a bit weird, but some of our studios started to say, okay, that's the core of the studio, where we have the core benefits. The intention is that everybody can stay forever, la di da di da. And then we attach, even freelancers we use for all the time, but we are open to them that no, they're not in the same group, right? That doesn't mean that we treat them as bad people or whatever, but they have different benefits. There's different stuff going on. If we invite them to our company on site for a work-related thing, yes, sure, we pay. But if we do, we are Munich, if we go to the Oktoberfest, which is more kind of a party thing, maybe they have to pay on their own. Because it's not necessarily something I take over. Again, this is not about creating the ruling class versus the worker class, but to a degree it is, right? It's just that you are clear about it and so on. If you talk about partners in even companies, it's similar but different, right? This is when outsourcing started, right? Again, going into stereotypes, people thought, I outsource to wherever, right? I just give them the work package, and it comes back. It's all great. I pay them, done. It's never that easy, right? There's issues. There's communication. How many times can I tell them to do something better? So you have to build that relationship anyway. How do you do that? You maybe go there once, right? Even the kind of old school physical interaction, having a drink even without alcohol, being California sober, whatever, right? You prefer, go into this and spend that time. So start building a true relationship, because you're looking for a partner and not just for some anonymous worker drone, right? Especially in something like gaming. And then there's even variances here, right? You can say it's just outsourcing. You could say it's co-dev. Co-dev is already very different, right? You can go and what's normally called embedded. So those guys, even from a different company, are working on the project like they would be your team. So they are in all the daily stand-ups and so there's already these degrees. Then you could say, hey, the relationship after 1 to 3 years is actually great. Let me become a partner in your company. So you either invest or give them other benefits and so on. So you take over some shares of the company. And so now, just some shares, maybe you're just a cousin, and as a picture, maybe then at one point in time they become your brothers, or if you want to take them fully over because someone wants to have less accountability, etc., they become a daughter company, right? But discuss these paths and always be, again, expectation management. Show a bit of vision. Don't overpromise. Don't tell them they will all be the same from one day to the other. No, it's a journey, it's a path, stuff can happen, and you have to understand that you need to invest in that relationship, especially if you want to build it long term.
There's a few points there. So when I was recruiting full-time contractors for studios, I actually used to advise the studio the best relationships are usually when they are treated as if they are the same as the team. So you don't necessarily keep them from the core communication. So they're on the same Slack channels, they're on the stand-ups, and they're, I guess, treated as a team member. And the majority of studios had that. But from what you said, that's slightly different. So I just wanted to double click on that. Like, what is the benefit of having that hierarchy? Like, what does that actually look like in practice? Why would it be beneficial for the studio, and in my case, I would use the word contractor, to be, I guess, really outlined like that is the case? Like, these are separate.
I'll give you an example, right? You form a company in a certain city. You have 20, 50, whatever people. You build it over years, blah, blah, blah. It becomes a tight-knit group, right? Then you work with someone remotely, even a group. You make them equal. No offense, socially they aren't. Because they are not going to a beer with you in the evening. So yes, certain kind of understanding the other person, how we deal with each other, is way more difficult to do. I'm not saying that what you said is not something you should aim for, but it makes it way more difficult. So in some cases, why not be a little bit more honest and direct in it, right? I'll give you another example. I know tons of studios which over time were 100% bought by either bigger studio or by publisher and so on. Then, in that spirit, they go there and say, "Hey, you're now one of us, la la la, we do this together," and so on. And then it's a decision on what game to make next. Do you really think that 100% owned studio now is making that decision on their own like they did before? Of course not. So a lot of these relationships become, to a degree, fake. There is kind of a legal side of the relationship. In that example, the mother owns the daughter 100%. They can tell them 100% what to do, and so on. And then there is kind of the relationship we try to live as we are all equal. We do this together, and so on. And then, of course, there is ultimately the truth, which is kind of a melange. And radical candor, the melange is the worst. If then your boss comes in and tells you it's all democratic, it's all collaboration, but in the kind of specific moments, it's not. It's hollow. It's fake. This is why I'm saying relationships are very difficult, even on a personal level. If you go and make games, which is difficult, lots of failures, lots of dreams shatter. In some of those things, my advice is to rather be a bit more gamey in a way. Now the relationship level is level 2. Well, how do we reach level 5? And maybe we reach level 10. But, dude, you want to behave like level 10. We're not there yet because we just met yesterday. Why not have that conversation? Even if you use the gaming language, everybody will get it. And as long as you give them benefits and ideally a path forward, and are explicit on how they gain more experience points to reach level 10, I think this is much more real and makes more sense, and ultimately will be, especially long term, way more successful. Does that make sense to you?
It does. And hearing you say the last part, like making it very explicit, like we're at level 2 because of course we are. We just met. It's remote. There's only logistically so much time we can spend together. But then you can reach level 5 and the ultimate level 10 if we maybe do 4 quarterlies a year where we're in person and we've been through a sprint, for example, and then we can kind of level up socially, like you said.
Exactly.
So, I like that.
It's the same with trust, right? I had so many conversations, especially with more junior people who were like, "Don't you trust me? Come on, really? Do you want me to trust you with my wife, all my money, with my life? Fuck off, right? Well, this is stupid, right? This is totally undercomplex, right? So this is why, for example, again, in our company, we nearly all the time, I ask them, how confident are you on a scale, 1 to 10, right? This is, trust, do I trust myself a 10 out of 10? Sometimes I'm not so sure. And so on. I think it's pretty obvious, right? And again, if you're explicit about it, you don't have these awkward situations. No, I don't trust you. Oh, but you should, right? It's nonsense, right?
Yeah, I think it's just being a bit more, I guess, practical with these things and literal rather than making it personal. It feels like we're just making it very clear.
Yeah, to also take the ideology out of it, right? I'm totally up for peace and world and happiness in the world, right? Who isn't? But I have to acknowledge that we are living in a physical world we live in, and we have to deal with certain things how they are, right? And I think if I'm ultimately not successful, I don't want it to be mainly driven by naivety. And again, talking about entrepreneurs, right? I think it's our job to get more real and deal with that, right?
Yes. I realize I haven't asked a lighthearted question. We've been intense. Like this is all good stuff, but I'm curious. Like, what's the favorite part of your job? Because I've asked a few CEOs if this, I guess, label of like CEOs always firefighting is real, and a lot of them say yes. So I was wondering, like in your day to day, like what's the favorite part of your job?
The favorite part is a couple of favorite parts. I love to especially work with more junior people who have the mindset to grow. I love that, right? This is why I do this Padawan Club and so on, right? Then to see the differences, guide them, support them on how they drive their own path. That's one of the things I love. Then I love advocating about our industry. I deal with lots of politicians. If I wouldn't have at least partly fun of it, why would I do it after 15 years? So that's something I really like. I love to have conversations. I love to have and formulate and come to opinions. So diving into challenges and decisions to be made, many times I actually like it, right? Even if it's difficult. Obviously, I like the whole culture. I play all the games. I'm a full blown nerd, right? I play the games, I have the comic books. That is not an ideal question as in one.
Okay, I'll
I can
change it
tell
again.
you.
What game has taken the most brain space?
In my lifetime, I'm 48 soon, right? It's probably Civ,
Civ,
the whole series. I played that a lot. Right?
Ungodly amount of hours.
And how to beat it on the highest difficulty, and playing it till late, and then waking up in the morning, kind of knowing what to do next, and all that stuff, right? That probably I spent the most mind share in, right? But there's so many other games, right? We talked about MMOs. I freaking loved Ultima Online, right? This is being able to, I wasn't like a player killer, but being able to do that, and also the thrill of going out and maybe I get killed and someone steals all my stuff, and I tell that to one of those people who already knack if a queue in front of a dungeon takes 1 minute too long, right? We lost all our stuff, dude. That's punishment, right? But I loved it. One of my other favorite games is Alpha Centauri, which is of course a Civ in a different manner. Still love playing shooters, right? I pride myself that I can still shoot 14-year-olds in the head, right? In a shooter multiplayer with a trackball, by the way, which is even a bigger insult to them. But yes, I'm not like high end, but I'm still pretty good. I like that. I love playing survival games, especially with friends, right? With my CFO, we regularly play some of those, have a good time. One of them, of course, Valheim during COVID was freaking awesome. Yeah. We had a server by the company on one of those kind of events we did. We invited others from the company to come visit our place, right? And we were tour guides on the server. Stuff like that is awesome. And ultimately, I have a thing for idle games, which for the moment I stopped playing because I felt a little bit too addicted. I played 3 or 4 at the same time. So that was a bit much, I guess. So I'm getting off it and try to deal with my dopamine management in different ways.
Don't play Balatro then.
Yeah, I played the demo bill on one of the next fests, and it was like, I'm not going to touch it again. But I think they obviously did an amazing job on doing that game. And but there's so many, right? This is one of the most emotional ones. Experience I ever had was Gone Home. This is I mentioned how old I am. Playing Gone Home felt like going back to my being a teenager, 14, 15 years old, the grunge, right? I had long hair, can you imagine? Looked a little like Cobain, loved grunge and all that stuff. Playing Gone Home, when I finished it, I think for like 20, 30 minutes, I was just confused, right? I didn't know if I should cry or be happy. I was just so emotionally taken by that experience.
I just brought the game up and I remembered PewDiePie playing it. And throwback.
And it's this... So especially when game can touch me in a certain way, or when it's already 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe I did a couple of substances or something, right? It's awesome. So I still enjoy good gaming sessions so much, right?
You mentioned the Padawan Club, and you mentioned how many games you play. I think you're the most gaming CEO I've spoken to. So, and I say that as a compliment, but also there's a bit of curiosity here. Is like, number one, how do you manage? But number two, I've heard some criticism sometimes from, I guess, people who are building a studio and they may be playing too much. Like, isn't there a fine line? From what I hear from you, I feel like there's a balance. But again, one time you saying you playing Civ till late at night, and then you go in the morning and you played 4 idle games at a time. There's either some magic I'm missing, or like, how do you have the balance? And maybe any tips you can give to others?
Yeah, sure. First of all, how do I manage is it's also life circumstances, right? I'm married, but I don't have kids. And I think in many, many circumstances, if you get older, this is one of the reasons why you spend less time playing games. What I sometimes joke about, though, is when people say, I don't have time. I have exactly the same time as you, right? It's just a matter how we spend it, right? So it's a matter of priorities. And the next thing is I play a lot of games just to check them out, right? And I also realize when a game becomes work, I'm not totally against grind, right? Sometimes grind is soothing and all this, but I became way better over the years to basically just, what I'm doing here right now, I don't want this, I don't need it, out, right?
I was going to comment on the 100 games a year, but now that explains it.
Yeah, exactly. Also I was never into the esports side of things, right? This is I totally respect all those guys who play Counter-Strike since 15 years and do the tournaments and all this. But for me, gaming was never a sport. I'm a curious, culturally interested person. I want to have the new experiences. I want to see the new thing from someone who thought, I do something crazy now. I want to dive into this. That is interesting to me. And a couple of other things, of course, my pile of shame is in absolute numbers quite high, but I don't know, I have like 3,000 and a bit games on Steam. My play rate is more than 50%, right?
There must be some record there then.
What else? I also, if it's getting too much, let's, I have to admit, I fired people early on who play too much.
Ooh.
Because, because they, they came in late every day. They nearly fell asleep because they played, you mentioned it, World of Warcraft every day till 3 o'clock and then, slept 4 or 5 hours. And I told them, dude, I totally respect you digging into this, but it's not, it's then a second time, third time, fifth time. And then at one point it's like, I think you don't have your priorities set straight, right? Again, I'm not just laughing, firing. I'm telling them early on, right? I think you're on a path which is not sustainable. And then I tell them again, and then I give them advice. I share stories of my own and so on. But at one point in time, it becomes their accountability to either change something or face the consequences. And so, yes, that I think kind of sums it up. Also, during the week, it's a very long time ago that I stayed up too late to still play the game. A very long time ago. Can I still do this on the weekend, on a Friday? Oh shit, 4 o'clock. Yes, I can. And I do, right? Many times, whatever, a big AAA game, action adventure comes out, Last of Us or something, I finish it on the first weekend, right? Because I also have that ambition, right? I have a bit this obsession about it, and I'm aware of it, right? That's kind of where I am as a gamer, right?
Yeah, I feel like there's that healthy balance, but from the sound of it, it's just you've got to really, I guess, know your limits and be very clear.
Yeah, exactly. And this one more turn, Civ, right? It is obviously a meme. And was I always able to just quit the next turn? No, but not another 25, right?
There you go. Yeah, small wins. I'm having that with Balatro. I did a comment on someone's post, and I said, Balatro was so good, I uninstalled it. And they said the Balatro devs are screaming right now because like, the game was too good. But then
just recently I played Marvel Rivals, right? Which is definitely
I'm scared to touch that because I used to play too much Overwatch. I was like, I ain't touching Marvel Rivals.
Yeah, this is I deinstalled it. I like it, but also I have to admit that how the matchmaking is done and so on fucked me up a lot, right? It doesn't feel fair, and I have sessions where I'm.
Is it like pub stomp, like old school Call of Duty, where it's just random? It's not skill matchmaking.
It's not skill, and it's also so fast, right? They want the dopamine flowing, right? This is you very rarely wait really long like for the next game. Exactly, and then even sometimes if you don't play rank, you put into the map. It already started, right? That you have this constant kind of dopamine rush. Mm-hmm. And what I also don't like is, some matches your team dominates. feels good once, but if you dominate then again and again, it's kind of the flow theory, right? If it's too easy, then it's boring. And then the next one, you get completely owned. This is frustrating to me, right? This is kind of, that becomes a kind of a luck thing. And I want to feel I'm getting better at things, right? So I also play other shooters, and there's definitely others where this works way better for me. So deinstalled Marvel Rivals will probably never revisit again, ever.
Fair. Alrighty, we're coming to a close here. We covered a lot of topics. I wanted to just ask you directly, is there anything you'd want to get off your chest that we haven't covered?
If you want to become an entrepreneur, and I think we covered this a bit, be there and open that this is going to be an intense ride. So this is more awareness again, call to action. Really understand that this is a profession in itself, being a leader, being a CEO, if that's what you're aiming for, and take that seriously. Besides, we also covered it again, find allies, find support, find mentors. Don't do this alone. Especially in times like this, feeling alone is really bad, and it can lead down a dark path. So do the work, stay vigilant, don't give up, try to see positive things, dive into habits, read books like Atomic Habits, understanding these things better about yourself, about psychology and all this. And one last thing, you said we were already going deep. For my taste, you could go way deeper and way more punchy, but maybe that's a thing for another time. I like that, to do that, because again, I think we need more opinions, we need more attitude, and we also ideally have people in the world who also stick to values and principles, and not just change them on a daily basis.
Love it. Sweet. I'll ask one more question, because I should. You mentioned it's a hard time for a young person to join the industry, but I have a godbrother. He's been trying to get into the industry for a good year and a half. I recently sponsored him to do a game design course with a previous guest called Alexander Brazzi, which is a bit more practical. And he's someone who I know he's going to get it, and he's working minimum wage. So with that context in mind, some people will ignore your advice, potentially, and just try to get in the industry now. Like, what would you tell them?
First of all, if they really believe they have the will and the right amount of talent, then be my guest. Go in the pit, right? Do it. Why do I say the right amount of talent? You know this, right? It's not about peak talent. What really makes you successful is doing it again, not giving up, right? The training, how to become a master is 10,000 hours, right? That's the spirit. If you have that feeling, go into the industry. Go, to a degree at the moment, sorry to say, but go exploit yourself, do minimum wage, and so on. Start climbing the ladder, get that experience, show your colleagues, your company that you really want this. And there will be better times. So now it's a more hard environment where you can prove yourself under fire, right? To use this kind of picture. And as long as you also look out for yourself to not die under fire, right? Then to a degree, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So it's not a 100% bad idea to do that and go into the game industry now. But you have to be aware it's not going to be easy.
Love it. And couldn't agree more. Amazing. So, Hendrik, thank you so much. Really enjoyed this podcast. And for everyone at home, we've covered a lot of ground here, but obviously there's only so much to cover in an hour. So I would say, Hendrik, where can people find you and learn more about you?
Of course, on the internet. First of all, you can check out our website, which has some information, but please feel free. Everybody is invited to add me on LinkedIn. Don't add me on X unless you want me to see screaming at Vatniks and all this, right? That's a little bit more hardcore. I'm also since recently on Blue Sky. And what else is there? And of course, I'm regularly at shows. One of the shows I love the most is Reboot in Croatia. I'm always there. Please do not shy away from just approaching me, say hi, diving in. And of course, one of the most easy things to do, and more traditional, just send me an email.
Fantastic. So that is rcp.family. Very cool website. And that's Hendrik Lesser on LinkedIn. You can find those details in wherever you're listening to this podcast. And shameless plug, if you enjoyed this podcast, maybe share it with your team. You probably have a Slack. Pop it in there. That is the best way this podcast will grow. And Hendrik, again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It has been a tremendous pleasure. And maybe to another time.